Yeah, my name is Gunnar. I work in the CTO office of Ericsson, and yeah, I basically do open source both from a governance perspective and compliance. And I will keep it closer, I hope. And I also do strategies for how we engage in different open source communities and foundations, etc. I will talk a bit about how Ericsson has come into the open source journey and how we are adapting to that openness. I think you already heard certain of these pieces from both Nokia and Siemens. And I hope that I will not repeat everything, but somehow there are similarities here going forward. I will anyway start with a 5G picture because I can't resist to do that as we are Ericsson. But it's not so much 5G itself that is important here. I think that, yeah, we have a 5G vision that anywhere and anytime you can use this for anyone or anything. The interesting piece for us here now is that all of this is done with one big network, one versatile network, and that versatile network is made up of a lot of open source. And I think that's why we're sitting here, and that's why all these different things are happening. I mean, there are so many things and there are so many new use cases popping up each day, basically. And the way to do these use cases is to take use of what is out there in open source and either consume what's already existing or create new things going forward. And I actually think that was a good point given by some of the other speakers as well, that it's very much a North American event, open source, and I think it would be really nice to see more European activity and being a Europe scene in a wider sense than what we actually are today. That would be really nice going forward. But looking a bit on our history then, we started off many years ago, decades, by using open source as technology elements that basically sneak themselves into our systems and products because someone figured out that it would be useful with that sort of technology element being a small bit of piece somewhere. We didn't really contribute to open source. We had some exceptions to this. We had this Erlang language that we released back in '99, for instance. But nevertheless, this was very much just a pure consumption of what was available out there. And over the time, this grew and grew, and we became usage or consumers of all these sorts of different things. But the first big paradigm for us, I would say, was that when we switched off from our proprietary or sourced proprietary operating systems and we started to use Linux. Because then we suddenly came into the scenario of having Linux and the full ecosystem of Linux. And suddenly that boomed our use of open source. And even though we, to a large degree, sourced Linux from the established vendors, like Red Hat or Monta Vista or SUSE, etc., we anyway started to understand that, okay, now we have all these open source. We need to actually understand how that works. We need to add things that we didn't thought of initially. And that then started to get into the skin. And the next big thing that happened was basically the virtualization then, when we had more and more of these bigger projects that came directly into what we might have seen as a bit of a comfort zone and seeing as our network. Now suddenly we have things like SDN controllers like OpenDaylight, we had OpenStack, we have the cloud native going forward as well. And these again then put even more focus on that we need to also be seen out there, we need to contribute things. We can't be stuck in a world where we basically fork off and maintain our own proprietary add-ons to these open source pieces, because we are just pushing a big churn of technical depth and cost going forward. So I think that what we see here when we came into virtualization is a much more active participation in open source communities from an Ericsson perspective. And I think that the next step that we haven't really come to yet is this step where we even more get activity in creating new projects going forward. Today we have basically joint projects and taking part in contributing to projects. I think the next big step, and that comes back to the Europe thing as I see it, would be to try to figure out, okay, what are the projects that we could establish in Europe and drive forward. But anyway, looking on our products today, I would say that most of all, or basically all our products have open source in some way. Of course, Linux is there, but we use it all over the place. And sometimes we use it a lot, and sometimes a bit less. And also what's happened then over the recent years, especially then with this virtualization and that stream, is that all these different projects have boomed. And there are so many of these, and some of them are rather similar or trying to solve the same thing. And some are coming from an enterprise perspective, some are driving towards a telco more specifically. And there's also always a hard choice to decide which one should you actually invest in and which one will be successful in this. So this has been a bit of a headache for us previously and probably today as well, I would say. I mean, if you look on the cloud native, for instance, if you look outside of the cloud native computing foundation, you will find that it's tons of different projects. And then cloud native computing foundation, they collect roughly a set of 14 projects that are mature and graduated. And of course, it's a bit tricky then, okay, out of the other 100 that exist there, which one should we actually choose and which one do we build these things on? And I guess there's not one choice there, but this is something that we definitely are scratching our heads on a daily basis to figure out, okay, which one is the best one for us today. And that comes back a bit to the Gartner hype cycle, in the sense that all these projects, they start somewhere, and they are rather attractive initially, all of them. You come into that, they look shiny basically, and everyone promises that they will fulfill the needs that we have. But over time, some of them will fade away, or at least there will be doubts that will these actually fulfill what we expected. And this is also something that we have been struggling a bit with internally, that we need to be we need to have perseverance when we do open source, because not all projects are ready in 6 months or a year or 2 years for that sake. So if we believe in something, we actually have to stick around and drive that project going forward. And I think that's a big difference between successful projects and not so successful projects, that the successful one has managed to keep attraction and community active also in the dissolution where things are not looking that good. You have to re-architect certain things, you have to rewrite certain pieces of your code. And those that maintain people, that maintain a churn of community, they can actually come up to the productivity again and provide something that is really good. I mean, Linux is the obvious one that has success in all of these things, but I mean, there are tons of other projects that we also have that looks really promising, or is promising, or actually have already fulfilled all of these things. Then, of course, when we use open source and consume open source, and we consume that, and usually that consumption leads to some sort of need to do contributions. And our consumption is then, of course, also something that we need to care for. I think we heard about that previously as well. I mean, somehow we want to, when we in-license something, we consume that piece, we want to understand, okay, is there a risk taking in this? What sort of licenses, security, trade compliance, quality issues do we have here? And we try to figure out then if this component is the best for our business case or not. Then we, of course, have to add that into our production phase as well when it comes to things like basic, probably boring stuff in the sense of admin work, productifying these, putting numbers on these components, and basically taking an ownership of that specific code piece so that we can provide support, etc., and maintenance towards our customers. And then, of course, we come into the compliance pieces in the end, where we want to ship something to a customer, and we then want to fulfill all the things that these open source licenses put on us from an obligation perspective, being copyright text, being license text, or source obligations for that sake. And of course, this is all good. As we heard on another presentation, it's super simple on a drawing paper. But when you come into the issues of new languages and containers, for instance, and all of these things, you get all these dependencies on products, and suddenly you have a big mess of things that you need to keep track of. And we are currently struggling a lot with getting everything into, I mean, when a designer press the build button, the system or the container go out and collect all sorts of stuff. And of course, we need to figure out, okay, what did it actually collect now, so that we can provide the green box here when we ship to our customers. So I would say that slowly it's growing into our DNA when it comes to open source. I mean, we started off with that we were very much reluctant in understanding how we should relate to open source. Of course, there are exceptions. Certain people understood this from day one, but it was also very much the things that was previously said as well, in the sense that, okay, why should we give away something? Why should we give this for free? And what's in it for us? These sort of things were comments given. And I think that we have gone from that phase to a phase where we are more understandable and we are more open, in the sense that we realize that, yes, of course, we should do open source. And this is just a rough picture of things that we are doing things in. I mean, we do tons of open source when it comes to our tool chain. We do a lot of different things that go into our runtime production, or our products, that is. And then we have also a number of different research activities where we are trying out things going forward. And I think that I put Erlang here as in the top left-hand corner, because I think that's probably the project that Ericsson has done that still is alive and actually have a very good community. And Erlang is a language that has been heavily bashed internally in Ericsson due to all sorts of reasons. And maybe it was a bit premature in time when it was originally launched, basically. But I think that when looking on it today and looking on those that actually take use of Erlang, it's a great language, and it's also a great community that has managed to survive over these almost 30 years soon, or 20 to 25 years or something like that. But then, of course, we are doing things in all sorts of ways. I talked about the tooling, I talked about our parts. I think much of the projects we do tie up to, for instance, the Linux Foundation, as was mentioned before. I mean, there are a number of different projects there that hit to us when it comes to things like the ONAP or Open Daylight, etc. We also look in OpenStack and do things in relating to OpenStack, for instance. Okay, so just to wrap up then, as I said, I think open source will continue to be a very important piece of our software development. It will not go away, and it will just be more and more. And I think we see that each day that, I mean, we are consuming all over the place, and that's not just one piece a day, it's many pieces a day. And I also think that the industry will continue to seek new areas to innovate via open source. I mean, that's the way to go. I mean, it was mentioned before that it's so complex today, so you need to use a collaborative way for certain things to be happening. I think that we can't do it ourselves, and we would probably not figure it out ourselves either. So someone will come with an idea, and that will be creating some sort of open source initiative, and that would then boom that certain thing going forward. And that's why I also think there is a need going forward then to collaboratively establish new open source projects that can address these new business opportunities also. I mean, there was a bit of a word on that on the introduction this morning relative Red Hat and GitHub. I think that's of course the shiny big ones with a lot of money on it, but there's a lot of other things that you can do business-wise when it comes to open source, and you see this tremendous amount of different companies doing these things. And We are basically not doing that. I mean, we are still selling a Ericsson labeled product, but I think that it will be interesting to see what sort of business models and business opportunities there is going forward. And with that, I would like to close and just come back to the Europe versus North America, or even North America and China, or Asia for that sake. And sometimes it feels like we are ending up like the net on a ping pong table where the ball is just passing by us. And I think we should raise that net a bit so that we can actually catch the ball as well going forward. Thank you very much.